Hello then and welcome back. Today we are just going to look at taking a normal flowchart and converting it into a bpmn flowchart. The only main real difference is that bpmn is just icons. All it is mostly, there's a little more to it than that, but mostly it's just using different icons which have become people have tried them out and we've found them to be more useful. I've found them to be more useful after other people found them to be more useful. So we're going to look at just a plain old ordinary flowchart. Here we go. I'm calling this invoice flow. On the top we have invoice origination, and then on the bottom we have invoice processing. And this is what it looks like as a normal flowchart. And then this is the bpmn version of the same flowchart. Now, the primary purpose of flowcharts is to communicate information, and generally that information is being communicated throughout an organization. And so the idea of the flowchart is to summarize the different things that are going on so that people over in accounts payable or accounts receivable can understand what the sales guys did and how it ties into what they do. And probably more difficult and more importantly, to get the sales guys to understand what accounts receivable has to do later on down the road. So we're going to look at these two examples and just kind of see what the difference is between having it set up as a normal traditional flowchart versus a bpmn flowchart. And you can see that it's mostly just, the big difference is that we have these dark X or dark plus sign icons whenever the flow branches, and a couple of small differences beyond that. We'll also use quite a bit, this is another version of the same flowchart, but you can see we've got some text boxes here to kind of give us additional information relating to these different processes. And then something that I recommend anytime we're making flowcharts is to always take a step back and make a flowchart that's much more generalized and much more abstracted. So this is really those same flowcharts that we just looked at summarized into one big summary flowchart. What we have here is one of the bpmn types of icons where there's a little plus sign down here at the bottom. And all that means is that this process right here has a whole bunch of other sub processes that are folded up into it, as does this one. And so that's an icon that communicates to us that we're looking at kind of a big picture overview. And all the examples we're looking at today are very simple, but as the flowchart becomes bigger and bigger and more detailed and involves more and more parts of the organization, the more helpful and important it is to get these kind of big mega processes folded down into just one process that represents a whole bunch of different moving parts inside of it. That really helps for communicating information, and also if you're a senior project manager up at the kind of looking at everything for an executive summary kind of view, it really helps to communicate that information. So in our first example, a traditional flowchart, we see that the text, there's a lot of information in each of these boxes. And one of the main things that I've done in order to create my bpmn flowchart is to simplify the text inside of these boxes. The problem is that that might leave out information that we want to include there. And so I've got two different versions of it, and this is the version that has the text call out boxes. So I'm going to focus on this one that has the text call out boxes and the old-fashioned one to get started. So let's just zoom in here and look first at the invoice origination process. We have purchase order received, order goes to fulfillment, which Jason, Trudy, and Rebecca do. Then the fulfillment completion form and invoice start is that process. And then from there we go to a decision. Does the customer already have an existing account? If yes, then we go over here. If no, then we go down here. and so forth and so on. And we've got similar processes for the follow-up after the invoice has been created and we have to go to billing and that kind of thing. So now we're going to look at the bpmn version with the call-out boxes. So for one thing, I've tried to simplify the wording inside of these processes, and then the extra information I've put up here in these call-out boxes. So invoice origination, we receive the purchase order, then it goes to the fulfillment process, which Jason, Trudy, and Rebecca are in charge of. So we can see that in the old-fashioned flowchart, it looks like this. And in our bpmn style flowchart, it looks like this. And this also gives us the ability to create an even simplified summary flowchart where we don't have those call-out boxes, and it looks like this. And again, the benefit here is not so much for the senior project manager, who is really in charge of understanding all the different roles of all the different stakeholders, but this is really useful in communicating information to people across different areas of the team so that they can see these steps here. And maybe Joe over in sales doesn't really know who's involved in fulfillment completion and isn't really involved in that part of the process. So he doesn't need to see all that information. Whenever I'm in the process of making these different flowcharts, I try to keep all my old copies. I don't just go in and change the original. I duplicate the original, save it as a separate thing, or normally what I'm going to do is down here in the bottom left, if you can see that. I know how I can make it visible. I got a trick here. Okay. Now you should be able to see that. So I'm going to right click on invoices and say duplicate. That gives me another copy to work with. Now I can go in and make all my changes. But I've still got my original version there. So I'm big on, I'm going to delete that right now though. But I'm really big on trying to preserve information and not lose my old work, my draft work, or my previous versions, because later on down the road, I might want some of this information about Jason, Trudy, and Rebecca, and I might accidentally delete it in the process. So for the detailed view, we have these text callouts that give us extra information about this task. But then when we're just trying to communicate this information to the sales team, we have this really simplified version so they can still understand the process, but they don't get overloaded with all of that data. And if we just look at just these first few steps of the process, order goes to fulfillment, fulfillment completion form, and invoice start versus this view of it, this one is going to be easier for the sales team to kind of digest. You can additionally see that for these processes, I've gone to the curved corners instead of the right angle corners. And for the start, for the trigger event that starts this process, I've gone to a circle and I've put the description below it. You could also notice that for the end event, we also have a circle with the description below it, and the circle is dark. And sometimes we'll have end events that'll be up in the middle of a process, like maybe the process gets canceled, or the sales gets canceled, and so we might have some kind of another process over here where it just ends kind of somewhere in the middle because the sale is canceled. So there's all types of scenarios where we'll have these end tokens or these end events throughout the flowchart. Now the next thing to talk about is these decision markers, or what we could call a gateway. That's what these are referred to as within the bpmn nomenclature. bpmn stands for Business Process Modeling Notation. Business Process Modeling Notation. And anytime you do a flowchart, you are modeling business processes. So the only difference here is the letter N on the end, which means the notation. And this is a somewhat standardized notation, which again, just a bunch of people in Germany who were very detail-oriented individuals managing ginormous projects tried it out and came up with this way of doing things and found that this is visually a good way to do things and make things easier to understand. And also, besides the visual benefit, there's also a kind of a debugging component. So what you can see here is that when we've come to this decision gateway, if the account exists, then we create an invoice. If the account does not exist, then we create an account. When these merge back together, we've put another gateway there to signify that we are joining our paths together. Whereas traditionally, we just have arrows pointing into another process, kind of like this. And this has a debugging benefit where we might have missed something along the way in this process, or we may not have noticed where something comes back together and merges. And again, this is something that people figured out through a lot of trial and error and a lot of experience. And this other way of having these gateways explicitly identified makes it possible to really see where those merges and those junctions occur. It's also common not to have the X when you first make a decision, but to actually just put the decision statement inside of the gateway, but then just have it merge with the X. Now there's also other types of decisions or gateways, and so I'm going to show that over here in the old-fashioned one. So in our normal traditional flowchart, in this case, this is now the invoice processing flow. Invoice sent to customer, set invoice status to sent/pending, create invoice process ticket, and then at this point, the flow it multiplies. It goes all three ways to all three of these people. So Kenny in accounts receivable, Kenny in accounting adds this to the account receivables. Trudy has her own invoice pending list that she manages, and then Max and Randy have an invoice follow-up ticket that they create. And we want all three of these actions to be created. And then we'll see different things out in the field. Sometimes people will put a process here where everything merges together. Sometimes we'll just see these arrows jumping together like that. And sometimes we don't really know exactly how to deal with re-merging these different processes. And then eventually the process is complete. Whereas with the business process modeling notation version, again, we set the status to sent or pending, process the ticket, and then it diverges into three different actions. And so this is a different type of gateway. This is what's called a parallel gateway. This one up here is called an exclusive gateway, hence the X. So it's either does one thing or the other. It's exclusive. It can only choose one path. And then when it merges, there's only going to be one event flow coming up here. It's either going to go this way or it's going to go that way. And we sometimes refer to that as a token. That's just the process of the event coming along through the flowchart until it gets to the end. So for this exclusive gateway, the process can only go up or down. It cannot do both. Whereas with this inclusive gateway, it's going to hit all three of those at the same time, and then all three of those are going to merge back in here before it gets to the end. And again, we repeat this gateway indicator both when it merges and when the junction occurs. And it helps us to keep track of where the process token, what step of the process our business is in. It's a lot like a computer program. This happens, then this happens, then this happens, then all these happen, then it comes back together and then it ends. And it helps us to debug, especially when we have a bigger bunch of processes all working together. So again, this is the simplified view, but we can also use these text callout boxes for if there's anywhere where we need more information. Okay, for example, register receivable, that's with accounting and Kenny. Trudy is the one who adds to the pending list, and Max and Randy create the follow-up ticket. That's really your quick overview of bpmn. Let me, and then I strongly recommend always creating more and more, as much as you can, a bunch of these wide angle view flowcharts. Whether you do it with the bpmn icons or just do it the traditional way, you will find time and again that this helps to keep the whole process organized. The more you can do these wide angle view flowcharts with kind of a multi-process, different multi-processes in there with the hidden sub-processes. Now, these are the most commonly used bpmn shapes and icons. There are many others, but we have an exclusive gateway, either or it could have three of them coming off of it, but it's got to choose only one of the three. It's only going to follow one path. The inclusive gateway or parallel gateway, where it goes through multiple paths all at the same time. This one is a more complicated gateway. This is where it could choose one path or two paths or three paths. And so it's just a more complicated decision. And then this one is a complex gateway where it's even more complicated than that. Gives you the ability at a glance, looking at a big flow chart, to be able to see, okay, this one is only going to one of those. This one's going to all three of those. Some of these icons, it's really an art form more than a science. You don't have to use them, but you'll find in certain situations that they're useful. Wherever there's an email, this is or a message, any kind of message being sent and then message being received. So in this case, we would want this arrow to kind of go like that from the sent to the received indicator. And then what we would want to do in this case is go to the format options, and we would want to make this one a dotted line because it's a message. So the messages are indicated with a dotted line. And I'll hide those format options. This card indicates a person, a specific person is associated with this process. And I've obviously done that with the call out text boxes, but there might be situations where you really want to communicate to people, okay, this happens and this happens, and then we've got Joe here, we've got Jeanette here, and we've got Jane up over here, and the processes go to them. Not required, sometimes useful. This is a collapsed sub-process or a mega process, we might call this, where there's a whole bunch of stuff going on within this box, and we've just summarized it. And then this process is a loop, so something that's looping over and over with inside itself. Flow charts in general are used for summarizing information. We'll have detailed docs, which give us more information than the flow chart. And personally, I like to have multiple versions of the same flow chart, so I can have a highly detailed version, a highly simplified version, an even more highly simplified version, and a kind of a medium range version here that gives us some of the extra information, but in lighter colors, and we can still just see the basic flow there. At a glance, again, especially for Joe on the sales team, that one's going to be easier to read for Joe. Easier for him to see all the other things that have to happen where he needs to be aware of it, but doesn't need to know the exact details necessarily. Okay, let me show you how to get these bpmn shapes into your flowcharts. So let's say I'm going to create a duplicate here again. I've got a duplicate, so I kept my old information, but now I want to go in and change some of these shapes and kind of upgrade it to a bpmn flowchart. So I go off to the left. This is in Visio 365 online. Search for shapes. There's a plus add shapes here. You can kind of go in and add some different shapes. For example, I went ahead and here I'll remove this just to show. My basic flowchart shapes did not have the curvy edged rectangles. It only has the straight rectangles. So I went in and said add basic shapes. Now I can go into basic shapes, and there is somewhere in here rounded rectangle. So now I can use this rounded rectangle for my processes. I can also right click on one of my processes, come down to this change shape icon, and go through and try to find which shape I'm looking for to get the curvy rounded rectangle, which is what I want. And so that one is changed already. But what I really want is the specific official bpmn shapes. So there's two ways to go about doing this. I'm going to first look up in here, search for shapes, bpmn shapes. No, that didn't do it. Let's see, bpmn. Okay, there we go. Now I got these bpmn shapes showing up, but they're grayed out. And that's because I have not upgraded, as you can see that diamond there. Some shapes match your search query, but they require a Visio Plan 1 or Visio Plan 2 license. So I'm not upgraded to use these. I found kind of my own different way to get those shapes in there. But then another way, besides searching for the shapes up here, we can also go add shapes, and then what is it? Custom shapes. No, Visio shapes. Well, might be hard to find that way. So you might just want to go bpmn here. That might be the best way to do it. I think once I try to drag it on there, there we go. See that? Okay, perfect. So now we found the bpmn shapes when I tried to drag one of those in there. See this text callout box in the middle? That's what the text callout boxes are supposed to look like. On my version, I just kind of came up with some alternate to that, but that's the official bpmn text callout box with extra information. And this is only showing some of them, but it'll have like when you make a gateway, then you can make all these other types of gateways as well. You can see the end circle, the start circle. Oh yeah, and they tend to use these thicker arrows, which end up being nice also. Although that's something you can replicate here just by saying, I want to format this arrow. Oops. Let's see. Well, let's do it here. Format options. There we go. So I take this arrow, and I can come over in my format options, and I can just make it thicker. I do like the thicker arrows. I prefer those. In fact, I'll just go and do a quick upgrade here. We can just go select that one, hold down Control or Shift, and select all these arrows, and then I'm going to make them all big. Big, 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 big. Oh, I missed one. Oh, I missed two. Grab that one. No, that one, and that guy. Got him. Big, 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 big. There we go. Yeah, I like the bigger arrows. Uh-oh, they're not the exact same size. Okay, close enough anyway. That's really your overview of, oh, and I missed these arrows too. Look at that. No, we can't skip these arrows. I don't think I'm going to be able to nail them all at the same time. Let's see if I get this one, this one, this one. Oh, I think I'm just going to have to do that many right now. Make them bigger, make them bigger. And then we'll get this one and make it bigger. I don't know, that might be a little bit too big, but you know, even more importantly than the specific icons is thinking about different ways to communicate this information to the team members and different ways to summarize the information so that it's as easy to understand as possible. Part of what we see, and not all project managers do this, but sometimes what we'll see is these smaller icons, especially for the gateways and for the start and end. We'll sometimes even see where the processes are smaller also, and they'll just take the text and put it below instead of having it inside of the process box. There we go. That's getting nice. Okay. So we might see it like this instead. And that might be overkill, but that's another way to just make it so you can really visually see just the different processes occurring. And it takes out a lot of the visual distractions in understanding how the process is unfolding. Okay, so that's how you get your bpmn shapes. I believe Visio Plan 2 is required for the bpmn shapes. That's what I remember from looking it up on Google. So even if you have the Visio Plan 1, which will give you the swim lanes, which I actually created my own kind of, just made up my own swim lanes here. But the swim lanes, I think, come with Visio Plan 1, and then Visio Plan 2, I think, is what you need to have the bpmn shapes. All right, now let me talk, this is going to be the last thing here, and we'll finish up. Now I'm going to talk about debugging and how this bpmn kind of notation is helpful for that. So here we have our merge and our junction, our decision gateway and our junction gateway. Again, when the paths merge, we want the gateway to match the gateway that caused the merge. So when they come back together, or the split, when they split, then when they merge, we want them to have the same indicator there. So I've found a bug here in this spreadsheet, or in this flowchart. And the bug that I've found is that, okay, account exists, yes or no? Yes, we create the invoice. No, we create the account, but then after we create the account, then we still need to create the invoice. So we're missing a kind of a bit of this process. So I could either duplicate this page, or I can just move it around to another bigger section of the page. I think I'll go ahead and duplicate this page. Duplicate. And then I'm going to go ahead and just delete this section. And I'm going to make my swim lane bigger. My homemade swim lane. This is the poor man's swim lane. Version control is always important. It doesn't matter what you call it. The poor man's version control means you just do save as and give it a new name, and now you have a second copy of the file. We can additionally accomplish the same thing just by duplicating the tabs down below. And the important thing is just whatever it takes, hang on to that old data until you're sure you don't need it, and then delete it. Okay, so what we need here is that after we've created this account, we need it to go through another sort of a step here to join into this create invoice. And so actually, see, the simple way is like that. But really, what we want to do with bpmn is we want to be a little more explicit. And we want to actually say, well, this is a merge. So what we want it like. Let's see, account exists. Yes, we create the invoice. We want it right here. I'm copying these arrows because I want to keep them thick. Otherwise, it's going to give me a skinny arrow. Okay, there it is. So now I have debugged this process. Oh, let's put this here. No, not like that. Like this. Here we go. I want yes there. No here. So we'll do it like that. So it's split, and then it's joined back together, and then it goes on to create the invoice. At any rate, that's a quick debug of this little process to make it even more accurate, so that after the account gets created, we still end up creating the invoice. We do have a split and then a merge here. And that's really your basic overview of why bpmn is helpful, why one might consider using the bpmn workflow notation, and how it might be visually easier to understand. You don't need to use all of them. Like I did all of this without having access to the Visio Plan 2. I think just using the curved corners on the cards, using the circles for start and end, and using slightly thicker arrows, I find that all of those to be very helpful and a good upgrade. And you can also, this is a more detailed process, but you can go in and like update your style or your theme. So let's see. Design, themes, connector style. Oh, curved lines. I don't know, maybe not. There might be a way to go in and upgrade your theme, just to have the thick arrows. But you can definitely do them the way I showed you. You click on it, get your format options over here. If you can't find your format options, you right click on the shape that you're trying to change and you look around here for format options. It's the one that's got the, let's see. It's got kind of it's got like a box with a bunch of arrows in it. See, it's got a box with the arrows there. And then whatever you've got selected, you can adjust the weight of the line. You can also adjust the color of the line. Maybe we want it to be red for some reason. That's all over here in the format options. Okay, this has been a very brief review of what it looks like to upgrade a workflow, a flowchart, from the traditional flowcharts to the bpmn style flowcharts, and trying to make things easier on the eyes as much as possible and a little bit simplified. Oh, here we go. Here's the one with the text box callouts. Yeah, I do like those thicker arrows. And again, big benefits as much as you can. You can always go and close these format options, but big benefits as much as you can to create these summary tasks. Summary tasks that represent a whole flowchart workboard on their own. And when you can get your entire organization and keep summarizing until you just have start, one big huge master process, and then end, and then you go in and make all the sub processes within that, then you've got a good bird's eye view. And this is where this is my own little method where I was able to get some of these bpmn shapes. Microsoft doesn't want you to be able to do this, but I figured out a little way to get these in there. They make it difficult. They want you to pay for that upgraded plan. Okay, so that's it. That's been our brief little overview and little upgrade from normal to bpmn. And the N just stands for the notation, which is basically the special icons. Special icons. And in most cases, you're going to need Visio Plan 2 subscription in order to get those. Thank you very much. I am your host, eagleDog, and it has been a pleasure as always.